We're here with Justin Credabel. We're at Aquashella, and I was talking with him recently about potassium. This guy loves potassium. I was like, please film a few minutes with me so we can discuss this and get this out to the world, because since 1997, I have been a saltwater aquarist, and not until 2021 did I decide it actually matters. So when did you first think potassium was the thing to start blogging about?
So when my first kind of like potassium getting on my radar was I was working out at Underwater World in California. We were developing aquaculture. My introduction to potassium was from Steve Garrett. He's a well-known, he's been in this for a very long time. It's a very cool outdoor coral aquaculture system.
Yeah, in California.
And, so I was working at Underwater World and developing the aquaculture facility for coral. And at that time, our water supply we were using, we were having problems with coral. We shouldn't have problems with, like, xenia wouldn't grow, mushrooms, those were just not doing anything. And then everything just looked ugly as sin. So we were actually purchasing corals from him as starters, because captive grown corals, if they're already established, they grow anywhere from 3 to 10 times faster.
Right.
This guy had lines of corals growing for years. So we were chatting and whatnot, and I was talking to him about our problem and bouncing some ideas off him. And he's like, bro, potassium, because he was using the same water, Catalina water. So it's actually just I don't know if it's a ship or a line a mile out or two off the coast, and they bring it in, filter it, and then they put it in tanks. But the alk's a little low, calcium's a little low, and that kind of stuff. But they correct for that with just a little bit of some chemical additives. But it turns out the potassium is something like in the low 200s.
Oh,
so
that's when it's bad.
Yeah, that was pretty atrocious. So his experience with it is pretty interesting because he was having the same issues, using the same water, started a regimen adding potassium, and then over time he got he was testing, and everything was going. He was shooting for like the 420, and then he got a new test kit and it was reading like 1200.
Oh,
and then he got another one, it was 1200.
Wow.
However, everything was amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. Everything were growing gangbusters. Colors were perfect.
Yeah.
So that was, and he's doing that for years. I don't know. I think he's still up there. But that was like, okay, well, potassium, and it's sure enough, we just, we're out of basic potassium chloride, and all of a sudden, all our stuff grew out.
Yeah.
And then we, over time, so most of my systems, I was shooting for, depending on the system, I was originally going to 1200, but I kind of ended up going between 650 and 800 ppm.
That's really high. Natural seawater is about 400, right? 420?
Yeah, 420. It's basically the same as calcium.
Yeah.
Also, natural seawater has almost no amounts of testable nitrate phosphate.
Right.
So it's like our aquariums aren't the ocean.
And when you dose potassium, I learned this I was fortunate, someone told me on YouTube, hey, if you're dosing potassium, watch your alkalinity.
That's interesting because I've never really had,
You never noticed that?
Yeah, I never noticed it. But it's probably because I was just always doing it.
Yeah.
That was just in my calculations for it. This is what it's doing. I've also noticed that it seems to, I don't know, I haven't really kind of cranked down into it, but it seems that more potassium allows you to have more calcium in the water. Actually dissolved.
Okay.
And generally I find that
That's interesting.
The calcium chases the potassium a little bit.
Yeah, so there's a possibility by raising my potassium, my calcium tends to always be 400 all the time because I have a calcium reactor. I might start seeing 425 or 450 because is it the chloride from the possitassium, or is it just like you said, the interactions causing the calcium to?
Yeah, is it something like that?
Absorb. What's the right word?
Maybe it's part of that magnesium seesaw.
Yeah.
Need more magnesium, then you can get more of the calcium in there.
Yeah.
There's something happening there. But yeah, I generally if I'm like 650, my calcium's going to be up around 590.
Still can't believe your potassium is that high. Now listen, he did a blog about this, and I read it, and of course it said like part 1. And I was like, well, where's part 2? Where's part 3? And I couldn't find it, and of course nothing worked, and so I just went to the source and said, where's part 2 and part 3? And he got super excited, and he said, oh, dude, are you gonna start playing with potassium? I'm like, no, I'm trying to save my reef. And he's like, oh, well, what happened? I was like, dude. And so I told him everything. And in the meantime, Joe Aiello, also, when I mentioned about potassium, he said I keep my system between 400 and 450. Now, is this a trade secret? Like, is this a dirty secret that the coral sellers are using crazy high potassium to get the super vivid corals so they can sell these corals? Because an acro is an acro.
Yeah.
But if it's a Justin Credabel acro, is
Yeah.
it because it's sat at 800 potassium and that's why it glows in the dark, or is that just a weird coincidence?
Well, no, I mean, honestly, right, so you have a coral and how it, its peak of what it could look like.
Yeah.
And that's the coral being its heaviest or whatever. We're not taking it like zeovit, low nutrient, kind of like that's
Right.
another thing.
That was pastel.
Yeah,
These
that's
are like vivid. It's
yeah,
insane.
this is-
Like, look at Jason Fox.
Yeah, yeah.
Perfect example.
Mhm.
You look in his little tank. He may have, I don't know, 30 frags. Every one of them glows in the dark, and you're just like, where is he getting these? And how come all these other guys don't have that?
Well,
so I'm wondering, do you guys cook the pH? Are you cooking potassium?
Yeah.
What's happening?
Honestly,
There's a
potassium,
secret we don't know
yeah,
about.
the potassium is a big thing, and you have all the different products too. So like Red Sea, when they came out with their color, I forget the brand with the 4 parts though.
Yeah.
One part is the potassium, and then they got the aminos. Aminos definitely do a bunch of stuff. But generally, like you can almost look at your corals. Also, iron and molybdenum, manganese is one of those other ones.
That you use?
Yeah, and the red seeds in that thing. So basically, the way I look at color, my color management, so number one, manage your nitrates and phosphates, so
Yep.
you don't get everything ground out.
Right.
Obviously, good light and everything. But then when you start to get to things like, all right, so like when in my time in retail, I'd be having like new customers or something, and it was the first year the tank kept going, and then it's generally about like 6 months they start to hit a wall.
Yeah.
So generally, I'm trying to get them, all right, 2-part, get comfortable with that. Usually, it's a big, it can be overwhelming for people to kind of think about and handle if they haven't been doing it. Worrying about salt. And generally, it's like you get over this hump, and then we'll keep talking,
Right.
and then. But generally, what happens is like these systems is there's 2 things. Is generally like the overall dissolved available, iron, molybdenum, manganese group gets depleted, and also potassium over time. And then that's when you start having problems with like their softies not growing as much, or the goniopora, all that kind of stuff. So it's so going back to like the color, you can actually kind of have like a little color cheat sheet that I would just look at my corals and I could tell what was missing. Because potassium, super bright pinks, kind of like a neon green. The iron's kind of like a hunter green, the healthy browns, that kind of stuff. You can go down the list, vanadium and chromium, they all do those little things. But you can, iodine helps with the yellows and certain reds and this and that. Like I don't even get to that. Like I used to like kind of talk crap on iodine before, until it was like, oh, you don't really need to worry about it. But everyone's like, especially when you're starting to get to those, really, really, 25 different color acros, it does become very helpful. Because it is, then you start getting into this thing where, so when you get super high light, you need the potassium, or everything's gonna suck. And then in that high light, they start needing the iodine because they need to deal with their internal processes for dealing with all the extra, superoxides and all the stuff from their, the zooxanthellae respiring. So it's basically like they're trying to like anti-bleach from the inside. So that supports that. You usually don't get into that until you're like really cranking the line
I'm
on
like
there.
listening, like I should be doing all these things. Oh, I don't want to do these things, because for me it's always been the salt mix has everything, and we're just adding a little bit of extra.
Well, the rule is like, if it's working, don't mess with it.
Of course, yes.
If you want to play with something, push one thing or whatever.
Yeah, one thing at a time.
Yeah,
Yep.
and it's just like, for me on the aquaculture side, it was like, how much growth can I jam out of these things as fast as possible? And you're like riding a bleeding edge of like enough nutrients to get really good growth, but not too much.
Yeah.
But also, these tanks have tons and tons of coral, not too many fish, just the right fish to do maintenance, and help you out. So it was easier to ride that edge, but it just made it, it was a big help. But really it's like I just did my 2 parts. So alkalinity calcium and iron manganese and a potassium. That's the way I look at it. It's like it's your photosynthesis support 2-part, and then your alkalinity bone growth 2-part.
Well, I know this is kind of a secondary topic. interjecting this, you didn't even mention, which surprises me, is amino acids.
Amino acids are, so amino acids that helps. So Aquapower is actually, that sauce in there. There's aminos, there's some vitamins and stuff. That definitely pumps out blues and whatnot. It's basically, aminos make a big difference. They actually do. Like, you can really get some really great growth, great color. It'll help the color go that extra mile. I bet you Jason Fox is probably doing it. You can do aminos. You don't have to do aminos.
Yeah.
But it's like, I noticed, like, on the farm, basically I was counting every penny.
Yes.
Cost per square inch per coral to grow per month. It was worth it to buy the Aquapower by the gallons every month.
Did you use it every day?
Every day.
Is it something you use 20 minutes before you feed? Or is
Constantly,
it
it's
the
like,
food? Because people said amino acids are the food. I'm like, no, I think that's the trigger response to get the coral to
But
eat.
it is a food. Exactly. So they have the ability to transport it cellularly, and they have specific reactions to it.
Okay.
That imply you can actually see. So you can see each different amino acid has an effect on the coral tissue. The coral responds differently with different ones, and you can definitely see with certain amino acids, like they're trying to get it in.
I've never given that stuff a good run. I've bought the gallon, and I hooked it for a little bit, and I used it for a little bit, and I couldn't tell, and I just kind of blew it off.
And I'm a fan of doing it like not a little bit of drips in it at a time. Like, you need to get it in there, wash it over them, and then because once it's in the water, it's, if you're just dripping it in slowly, it probably is not even gonna get to the coral by the time, like, bacteria in the water are actually getting it utilized and stuff like that.
Okay.
So you just kind of like dump it in. I would do it like 2-3 times a day at work. I just do it manually.
Wow.
Yeah.
2 or 3 times a day.
Yeah.
Okay.
In big chunks too.
Yeah.
It'd be like, boom, there's a quart.
Yeah.
A
quart. Okay, so a lot of you guys are new. You do not have to do what we're doing, but what we're talking about is people that have been doing this for a long time that are trying to fine tune their reef keeping. I know everyone is like, these days, everyone buys the gear and everyone buys all the dosers and they buy all the bottles and like, why does my tank look like this? And like, I've spent all this money. It's like, well, like you said before, learn how to do the saltwater, then learn how to do 2-part dosing. Then we can start adding one thing like potassium.
Yep.
Now, your number of super high, is it true that using potassium as a dosage can result in red turf algae growing on your rock?
It's supporting basic metabolic functioning. So if you're at that edge where it might be about to grow, if you have entrained phosphate, stuff like that in the rock, is just going to help that grow. So it's like, messing up somewhere else, but it's like, it's people are like, oh, put too much light in your tank, you're going to get algae. You're like, well, the ocean has all the sun. It's a nutrient problem.
Right. Well, the reason I asked is because I had someone warn me, you're about to deal with that because you're dosing all this potassium.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I'm looking at my rock, and my rock is like red everywhere, but it's not cyano, and it doesn't rub off. And like, that could very well be red turf algae. It just hasn't, it's there, but it hasn't burst, or the tanks are mowing it down, or I don't know what. But I did notice after dosing 3 liters into my system over 4 weeks that I do have a lot of red, but it's not everywhere.
Yep.
And I'm not super scared of it, but I wanted to know, is that common? So like, if somebody else wanted to try dosing potassium, would they expect to start seeing, I thought, this red on their rock?
All right, so if you look at a bag of fertilizer, it has the NPK ratio.
Yeah.
So number one is like, why the heck aren't we paying attention to that? We're paying attention to nitrate, phosphate, but not potassium, and it's so important that we consider it all the time, and these are, but it's also a nutrient, right? So it's it's gonna lead things more likely, if they can happen. It can push it to the other side, but you need that potassium. All the other stuff needs potassium too. So it's just like, you'll just have to, so it's a yes, but ideally you would have the issue addressed in another way.
Okay.
And there could be a thing where it's because the system was going at a certain point, and then you probably got like a change in your population, even like your bacteria and all that stuff in the rock and whatnot, and maybe some of that shut down, and then now but generally, yes, it is a nutrient, but it's everything else needs it too.
Yeah, no, I was just curious that was like, could you expect that? Like, we know that if you, I don't want to throw any companies under the bus, but if you use reefroids, you tend to get cyano.
Yeah.
I've always had that. Same thing with Oyster Feast. Oh my God.
Yeah.
I put 3 drops in my tank. Cyano.
Well, that's,
like,
you know, it has this,
man.
there's certain organic nutrients and, that, and especially when they break down, that available phosphate, the form that that's in or whatever, it's just really amenable to that.
Yeah.
But the potassium chloride is just potassium chloride. It is, you know, basically, you know, it's like nitrogen and phosphorus. It is, you know, a nutrient in that regard, but you can't get away with not having it.
Would you call potassium a trace element or a major element?
Isn't it a major element? Because I mean, calcium's major, isn't it? Yeah. So
Right.
It's like, dude, it's the same as calcium.
So how did I not know about it?
Well, most
until
people
2021.
You know, I'm still. I guarantee you, there's still going to be like another decade or two. It's like, you know, it takes a while for things to catch up. But also, it's like your maintenance regimen, the products you were using.
Yeah.
You know, not a lot of people do water changes like religiously, like you do, and all that kind of stuff. That did work.
No, I don't.
Oh,
I'm not a water changer. I hate water changes. So I'm doing a few.
Yeah.
In the last 100 days, I did a total of 400 gallons of change, and over 4 different water changes. And they weren't all equal size. One was 60, one was 40, one was 100.
So like, you know, you're so everything was working for you. You're probably shooting around 400. For me, 400 is already too low, or even the upper 300 is way too low.
Yeah.
I think everyone should get around 450 at the very least. You know, you're going to see much better effects.
Well, I'm going to do that. I'm going to crank mine up to 450.
But yeah, it's like, you know, potassium. There is potassium in food and all these, you know, there are some of these other sources.
Yeah.
If you're using like a 2-part like B-ionic or some of these other ones, they actually, it's not just
it's
you know,
in it.
It's in it, you know, and there's a reason it's in it.
Right. Okay.
You know, so it's you know, animals need certain things, but yeah, it's also like, hey, if you're gonna start a new thing, just go slow.
Yeah.
You know, just don't just crank. You know, if you
gotta have a test kit so you can see where you're at.
Yeah,
too.
you know,
which one do you like?
I like the Salifert because it's
I
just.
keep hearing that.
Yeah, it's basic, it's easy.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, the other ones are just, it's so many steps, and I get frustrated.
Yeah.
And you mess up one thing, and it's kind of, the Salifert is just very easy, and it's reliable.
Yeah, I need to order that one. That's the one. I don't think it's at the show.
It's basically like doing a calcium test.
But that's the one that I needed, because I've been using Fonamarin. That's the only one I have. And it is, you mix this up, you wait 5 minutes. You mix up this, you add 2 more minutes. And then you do this, and then you count the drops, and then it's kind of an ordeal.
I already hate testing. So.
Have you tried the Smart Stir? I tell everyone use the Smart Stir.
No, I've never heard of it, actually.
Amazing. So it's a little device. CoralView distributes it. You plug it into the computer to charge it. It's one of those chargers, and it'll hold the charge for months. And I use mine every single weekend for months, and it always works. But if it finally gets low on battery, it turns red. And the rest of the time it's blue, and so blue is good. And you just put the beaker in there. It's got a little tiny magnetic bead, and I do every test through that beaker, and it spins. Cool. I never have to do this.
Dude, that was like,
it's the worst.
I was getting carpal tunnel when I was back in the retail days, testing for people.
Any last thoughts, warnings, or wisdom, opinions?
Take it slow. Don't, you know, do one thing at a time. You know, don't, if your regimen's working and you're happy with it, don't go chasing numbers.
Yeah. If like you said earlier, if your tank looks good, why are you doing this at all?
Yeah.
So it really is, it's an extra step that's not part of our normal routine, but having the kit to measure it, I think, should be part of the normal routine now. Yeah. Now I feel it's that important.
Yeah. And
after what happened to my tank.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's like, you know, and you know, having to, I believe, right, you ICP'd, and that was kind of how you figured that out.
Yeah.
So if you have the ability to do that, that's always helpful.
Yeah.
You know, do that every month or 2 or 3 if you have the means, and that can just kind of give you a warning, you know, if something's off. But you know, if you're not having a problem, you don't have to fix it. But if you're having an issue, maybe consider that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, you're very
welcome. I really appreciate it. I was like, if anyone's gonna talk about it, it's gonna be you, because you have been preaching potassium for a little while.
When I saw that you're having, I was like, bro. It's like, welcome to the dark side.
He did. He literally said that. Thank you so much.